Hi, I'm Paul Davenport and welcome to another Gospel Online video. Please subscribe to our channel by clicking the button below. This video is about the real Gospels. What do we mean by that? To say that there are some Gospels that are real implies that there are some that are not real, or at least should not be given the same status or weight. Whether those are the right categories to use, I'll leave you to decide if you'll just stay with me for the next 15 minutes or so. Now, I think we have to start with what we expect a gospel to be. It's a word that just means good news, but it's particularly associated with the good news announced about this character, Jesus. You may well have heard of him. What we expect from a gospel, therefore, is for it to be a reliable witness source as close as possible in time and place to the man Jesus and to whatever happened in his life. Now, the four traditional Gospels, again, I'm sure you've heard of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all make some remarkable claims about Jesus. They say, for example, that he was the Son of, no, they say he is the Son of God, that in a short life of 33 years or so, he performed miracles, and although he was innocent of any crime, he was arrested and crucified. And then the most extraordinary claim of them all, they all claim that he appeared alive again to his followers 3 days later. So if you're going to examine those claims, it's a good starting point to know whether these four traditional Gospels are the right source material. Now, you might think that you can rely on the process of history to have preserved the right source material for us. But you don't need to do much investigation into this to find that there are many who question that. There is a view that there were many other texts called Gospels freely and happily circulating in Christian communities until the 4th century, when a political decision was made to adopt just 4 and to seek to eliminate the others from history. Now, just as an example of that view, it's common to quote from the character Teabing in Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, in which he is asked by one of the characters, Sophie, who chose which Gospels to include. Aha, Teabing burst in with enthusiasm. The fundamental irony of Christianity. The Bible, as we know it today, was collated by the pagan Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. Now, no scholar seriously thinks that. It's really a straw man position, which I'm not going to address in this video. And I'd credit you with more sense anyway than to base your opinions on a novel or a Hollywood film. However, the basic narrative of an early church, awash with a sea of Gospels, all held in equal standing for several centuries, from which 4 were selected arbitrarily or for political reasons sometime in the 4th century, has still become lodged as a popular perception. And even if there is limited direct scholarly support for it, some seem quite happy for that perception to continue. However, when we do some fairly straightforward historical research, this simplistic narrative just doesn't quite stack up. So what are all these alternative Gospels? Here's a list of texts with Gospel in their title, originating from the 2nd or 3rd centuries. And there are 16 in all there on the screen. To be a serious contender, though, an important criteria for a gospel is that it is a close witness to Jesus. So it's common to apply a cutoff date of around about 175 AD. Anything produced after that date is highly unlikely to originate from a source close to Jesus himself. It's 150 years after his life. When we do that, that reduces the list to 9. And we should probably also remove the infancy gospel at the bottom there, as that is not setting out to be an account of Jesus' adult life. So we're left with 8 alternative possibilities. Now, we'll consider 4 lines of inquiry to assess the credentials of these alternatives against the 4 New Testament Gospels. We'll look at dating, we'll look at evidence from papyri, we'll look at evidence from authorities that quote from these texts, and we'll make a couple of points at the end about the content of the texts. Now, from a simplistic dating point of view, The 4 New Testament Gospels are all earlier than the alternatives. So here are the alternatives and their dates, and here are the 4 New Testament Gospels, and a conservative estimate of their dating. Although, in fact, there is a reasonable body of evidence that would date the 4 Gospels earlier than stated on the slide there, and would put them between 50 and 70 AD. So if we're looking for sources close to the life of Jesus, the 4 Gospels in the New Testament appear to be the most obvious candidates, just on this simple criteria. Now let's look at evidence from Papyri. Now, here on the screen, there are 3 scholars' views on the numbers of fragments of papyri that we have available from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So Ehrman, Hengel, and Hurtado all put the fragments of the 4 Gospels, the New Testament Gospels, at over 30, and 38 is the general consensus there, and of the alternative Gospels, about 14 manuscripts. Now, based on this, the conclusion has been drawn that the alternative Gospels were in circulation just as much as the 4 New Testament Gospels and held in the same standing. Now, the first comment is that this is a very small sample. Of all the Christian texts produced and in circulation in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, a total of 52 is a tiny sample, and it's usually unwise to draw conclusions about a total population from such a small sample. But a little further analysis is worth pursuing into the nature of these papyri. Firstly, all of the 38 manuscripts of the 4 New Testament Gospels were part of a codex format. That's like a book bound together between 2 covers, a codex format, rather than on scrolls or unbound sheets. Now, it's likely that texts held to be important were bound together in this way, in a codex format. Of the alternative Gospels, you can see only 4 of those fragments were part of a codex. There's an additional factor to consider as well, and that is the size of the documents. A large format bound in a codex would be harder to carry, but would be much more suitable for use in public reading in Christian communities. Smaller codices would be more likely for personal use and easy to carry. Of the 38 manuscripts of the 4 Gospels, 21 are in this large format codex format, whereas only 2 of the alternatives are in that format. So with that additional color on the nature of the papyri, we can see that there is likely to have been a distinct difference between the standing in which the 4 Gospels were held compared with the alternatives. This analysis comes from a book called Who Chose the Gospels by C.E. Hill. But this sort of analysis is not enough. As we said, there are very small numbers involved. So we'll now look at the support for the 4 Gospels and the alternatives in direct references from recognized early authorities. Now, perhaps the best known of those is a comment from Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon, writing between 174 and 189 AD, so in the 2nd century. And here's what he says. It is not possible that the Gospels be either more or fewer in number than they are. For since there are 4 zones in the world in which we live, and 4 principal winds, while the church is scattered throughout all the world, and the pillar and ground of the church is the gospel and the spirit of life, it is fitting that she should have 4 pillars, breathing out immortality on every side, and vivifying men afresh. He who was manifested to men has given us the gospel under 4 aspects, but bound together by one spirit. So he is very adamant that there are 4 Gospels. But what's interesting is that he's not necessarily arguing here for 4 Gospels as opposed to 5 or 10 or 16. He's simply explaining why he thinks it's appropriate that there are 4. He expects his readers to already know and to already accept that there are 4 Gospels. He's using that as a prerequisite. This indicates that they were already established as authoritative well before Irenaeus wrote this in the 2nd century. But he's not alone. Here is a list of 15 sources ranging from the end of the 1st century with Ignatius to the 4th century with Jerome, the producer of the Vulgate. we can examine how each of these sources refer to the four Gospels and to the alternatives. And here's what happens. With Matthew, 14 out of those 15 authorities accept Matthew as an authoritative account of Jesus' life. With Mark, it's 13 out of the 15. With Luke, it's 14. And with John, it's 12. But when we go down to the 8 alternatives, this is what we find. No references to the Gospel of the Ebionites as authoritative, one for the Egyptians, and so on. Very low numbers. From this, it is clear that there is a distinct difference in the status of the four Gospels over the alternatives, and that's consistently running through from the 1st century to the 4th century. There are additional sources that we could refer to, such as the Muratorian fragment, which is dated to 175 AD, which appears to give a list of accepted New Testament texts. But as the name suggests, it's a fragment. We only have part of the text. But it refers to the 3rd Gospel book, being that according to Luke, and then the 4th of the Gospels, that of John. But what we also have as a final piece of evidence in this section is towards the end of the 2nd century, we have evidence of people seeking to produce a harmony of the different gospel accounts. So, for example, Tatian's Diatessaron, which just means made up of 4, which he produced in the 170s AD. And we also have a harmony of the Gospels produced by Theophilus of Antioch in the 180s. So both in the 2nd century, well before the 4th century. Both of these use only the 4 New Testament Gospels as their source material, indicating the status of those Gospels in their minds. So from this survey of authorities favoring the 4 Gospels over the alternatives, we can also see that they were spread throughout the Roman world. We've looked at authorities and sources from France or Gaul to Rome, to Antioch in Syria and Alexandria in Egypt. The conclusion of the skeptic Bart Ehrman on all of this evidence is as follows. He says, the oldest and best sources we have for knowing about the life of Jesus are the 4 Gospels of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is not simply the view of Christian historians who have a high opinion of the New Testament and its historical worth. It is the view of all serious historians of antiquity, of every kind, from committed evangelical Christians to hardcore atheists. Finally, then, let's make a comment about the content of the 4 Gospels as opposed to the alternatives. The New Testament Gospels all set out a narrative involving a complex array of people, places, and events. Now, if you're producing a forgery, this is a high-risk strategy, and it's really hard to get right. The alternatives, on the other hand, are mostly collections of sayings and philosophical reflections, largely disconnected from real people and places. This chart illustrates the difference neatly, showing the number of place names referred to in each of those documents. Now, we have another video in this series which covers whether the names and places used in the 4 Gospels of the New Testament are accurate. So please take a look at that. But the point I want to end with is that the 4 New Testament Gospels all outline the same startling narrative. Yes, there are differences of detail, but there is no difference in the claims being made about Jesus. And these can be summed up in the words of Acts chapter 2, reading from verse 22, where Peter says, on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This same Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. This Jesus God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses, being therefore exalted at the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he has poured out this that you yourselves are seeing and hearing. That's an encapsulation of the message, the gospel message, which starting at Jerusalem, then spreading to Judea and Samaria, and then spreading to the ends of the earth. Now, as human beings, we respond to stories about people and places. We engage with stories. Everything that happens to us, we wrap it up in a story when we tell other people about it. It's what we are and it's who we are. And that's why the 4 real Gospels set out to tell the most compelling story ever told. So pick up any of those 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and read it for yourself. You could read it on your own, but I'd say it's better to read it with other people and see where it takes you. Thanks very much for watching. Subscribe below to our YouTube channel, where you can also comment and ask questions. Look us up on Facebook as Gospel Online and on Instagram and Twitter as Gospel Online UK.